Joab, a seasoned general, saw the sadness in King David's eyes. It had been years since Absalom, David's son, had fled after a terrible act. He had murdered his half-brother Amnon. David's heart ached for Absalom, but justice had demanded banishment. Joab believed it was time for Absalom to return. He devised a plan.
He sought out a wise woman from Tekoa, known for her cunning and eloquence. Joab knew she could sway the king's heart where he could not.
The woman agreed to help. She was a mother, and she understood the depth of a parent's love. She would appeal to David's compassion, weaving a tale that would mirror Absalom's own. Joab's plan was a gamble, a dangerous dance with the king's emotions, but he was determined to reunite a father and son. He was sure it was God's will. The wise woman stood before King David cloaked in mourning. Tears streamed down her face as she spun a tale of woe.
She spoke of two sons, locked in a deadly quarrel. One son, in a fit of rage, had killed the other. Now, the family demanded justice. They wanted her remaining son dead, a life for a life. But she pleaded for mercy. She argued that taking another life would not bring back the first.
David listened intently, moved by her grief. He assured her that her son would be safe, protected by the king's own decree. He vowed that no harm would befall her remaining child.
Why then have you dealt this way with your own?
Her words struck a chord in David's heart. He realized the parable mirrored his own situation with Absalom. David, his heart heavy with the woman's words, understood the implication. He saw his own reflection in the story of the grieving mother. Joab, watching from the shadows, knew his plan had worked.
David agreed to allow Absalom to return to Jerusalem. His heart yearned for his son, but the memory of Absalom's crime cast a long shadow. He could not yet bear to see him face to face. The king made it clear that Absalom was to remain in his own house. He was forbidden from seeing his father.
It was a bittersweet victory. Absalom was back in Jerusalem but still exiled from his father's love. Joab, relieved and hopeful, went to deliver the news to Absalom. It was time for the prince to return home, but the path to reconciliation was still long and uncertain. Absalom returned to Jerusalem a changed man. The weight of his crime hung heavy on his soul. He had yearned for this moment, to be back in his homeland, to breathe the air of his childhood.
But his return was not what he had hoped for. The city walls, once familiar and welcoming, now felt like a prison. He was surrounded by people, yet utterly alone. He was allowed to live in Jerusalem, but his father refused to see him. Every day was a painful reminder of his exile. The king's love, once a source of warmth and security, now seemed distant, unattainable. Absalom's heart grew heavy with resentment. He had longed for his father's forgiveness, but it seemed like a distant dream. He felt trapped, his life on hold, his future uncertain.
2 long years passed. 2 years of silence from the palace. 2 years of living in the shadows of his father's love. Absalom's frustration grew with each passing day.
Joab, I need you to intervene. Please help me.
But Joab, perhaps fearing the king's wrath, did not come. Absalom felt betrayed, abandoned by the very man who had engineered his return. In a moment of desperation, fueled by anger and despair, Absalom took matters into his own hands.
Set fire to Joab's barley field. Let the flames speak for me.
The flames, visible from the palace, were a desperate cry for attention. The news of the fire reached Joab. He understood the message. Absalom, consumed by his own anguish, was willing to risk everything to force a confrontation. Joab, alarmed by Absalom's reckless act, finally went to the king. He knew he could no longer ignore the prince's plight.
My king, you must see your son. Ignoring him will only breed more bitterness and despair.
David, his heart torn between anger and longing, finally relented. He agreed to meet with Absalom. The years of separation had done little to diminish the love he held for his son. The reunion was filled with raw emotion.
Father, I'm so sorry.
Absalom, his face etched with years of pain and regret, prostrated himself before his father. David, his eyes filled with tears, embraced his son.
My son, oh my son.
The years of estrangement melted away in that embrace. Forgiveness, long sought and desperately needed, flowed between them. It was a moment of healing, a testament to the enduring power of a father's love. Although the fire had brought a temporary reconciliation, the embers of resentment still smoldered in Absalom's heart. The 2 years of waiting had taken their toll, leaving him feeling slighted and disregarded.
Why was I treated so unfairly? I avenged Tamar, didn't I? I acted in the name of family honor.
The more he dwelled on these thoughts, the more the bitterness twisted inside him. He began to see his father's initial reluctance to see him not as a consequence of his actions, but as a sign of waning affection.
I crave the power and authority that should be mine. I yearn for the day I can step out from my father's shadow and claim my rightful place.
He yearned for the day he could step out from his father's shadow and claim his rightful place. In an attempt to fully mend the fractured relationship, David announced a grand feast in honor of Absalom's return. The entire court was invited, and the palace buzzed with excitement. Lavish decorations adorned the halls, musicians played joyous melodies, and the aroma of roasted meats filled the air. It was a celebration of forgiveness and a promise of a brighter future.
Welcome, everyone, to this grand feast. Let us rejoice in the return of my son, Absalom.
Absalom, dressed in his finest robes, was the center of attention. He basked in the warmth of the crowd's admiration, their cheers fueling his ambition. He saw the feast not as a gesture of reconciliation, but as an opportunity. As he looked upon the smiling faces, a dangerous thought began to take root in his mind. He could use this goodwill, this newfound popularity, to his advantage. He could turn the people's affection away from the aging king and towards himself.
Thank you all for your warm welcome. It is good to be home.
But in his heart, Absalom was already plotting his next move. The image of the crown, heavy upon his father's head, became a constant fixture in Absalom's thoughts. He imagined the weight of it, the power it represented. He convinced himself that he would be a better ruler, a more decisive and vigorous leader. He began to sow seeds of discontent among the people, subtly hinting at his father's supposed failings.
My father, the king, is wise, but perhaps he is no longer as strong as he once was. Maybe it's time for a fresh perspective.
He presented himself as a man of action, a champion of the downtrodden, someone who understood their needs better than the aging king. His charisma and charm, combined with his carefully crafted narrative, began to sway the hearts of the people. He played on their sympathies, their desire for change, slowly weaving a tapestry of rebellion. What began as a desire for his father's love had morphed into something far more sinister, a lust for power that threatened to tear the kingdom apart. David, oblivious to his son's machinations, was overjoyed at the apparent reconciliation. He saw in Absalom a changed man, a prodigal son who had finally come home. He believed in the power of forgiveness, in the possibility of a fresh start. He failed to see the darkness that had taken root in Absalom's heart. He missed the glint of ambition in his eyes, the subtle manipulations that were turning the people against him.
My son, I'm so proud of you. I believe in you and your change of heart.
Blinded by his love for his son, he remained unaware of the storm that was brewing, a storm that threatened to destroy everything he held dear. His belief in Absalom's transformation would prove to be his undoing. The stage was set for a tragic confrontation, a battle between father and son, fueled by ambition, betrayal, and a love that had been twisted beyond recognition. Absalom's return to Jerusalem, orchestrated with cunning and driven by desperation, had set in motion a chain of events that would have far-reaching consequences. What began as a tale of forgiveness and reconciliation was slowly morphing into a narrative of ambition and betrayal. The seeds of rebellion, sown in the fertile ground of Absalom's resentment, were beginning to sprout. The kingdom, once a beacon of unity and prosperity, now teetered on the brink of chaos.
The time is coming, we must act, and we must act soon.
The story of Absalom serves as a timeless reminder of the complexities of family dynamics, the enduring power of forgiveness, and the seductive nature of power. It's a cautionary tale about the fine line between love and ambition, and the devastating consequences when that line is crossed.